Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live sports and TV for half the cost of cable. There's no contract and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. The Cleveland Cavaliers' hopes of sweeping the season series against the Boston Celtics died after a spirited comeback. No Carter Rodriguez again on this episode, but I am happy to introduce our guest, Boston Celtics reporter for The Athletic, co-host of Everything is Potable, frequent podcaster on The Athletic NBA show, and Sacramento Kings superfan Jay King. Jay, how you doing, buddy?
I love how you put the Kings thing in there. I don't know how that became part of my brand. Um, like it's kind of a sad thing to have, but here I am. I'm the Kings guy from Basketbuds.
Yeah, I feel like Zach just kind of bestowed it upon you. Like he just pushed off all the Sacramento stuff onto you, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we'll just make this a thing." But it's one of my favorite recurring bits of the season, and I love that it started off as like a way to make fun of you for thinking they're going to be good, and then it just genuinely became something that was like worthy to do all season.
Yeah, they thought they were just going to shit on me once a week, every week, because the Kings were just going to be terrible. But instead, they're in third place in the West and the greatest scoring team in the history of basketball. So, jokes on that.
How the turntables, indeed. Honestly, it was a pretty entertaining game between the Cavs and Celtics last night. I expected the A game from the Celtics, coming off a loss to the Knicks where they were certainly frustrated. I know Jaylen Brown in that one. I believe Jason Tatum got ejected as well. And as I mentioned before, the Cavs won the first two games, and Boston's a very good, proud team. And the biggest difference from this game and the other ones was, oh my God, Robert Williams looked like himself again last night. And honestly, it was as good as I've seen him look all season. Can you speak to what a difference he's made for Boston so far since he's been back?
Yeah, if you look at any of the advanced statistics, the on-off metrics, like they are a very good team without Robert Williams, and they become a great one when he's on the court. They're outscoring teams. I think it's by 10.9 points per 100 possessions with him on the court. Their defense when he's next to Horford is like basically impenetrable. And so as many games as they won without him when he missed the first 29 games of the season, some of that was just due to unsustainable offense. The real formula for them is being a great defensive team, and they're very good, like I said, without him. But when he's on the court, he just transforms them. And like you said, he hasn't really been at his absolute best so far this season. His block numbers are down, his steal rate is down. But like he still makes a huge difference. And if you look back even to the finals, he was like hobbling around on one leg for some of that series and still was a huge impact guy for them. So he just totally transformed them, and especially against the Cavs with all the size they have, with two guys in Mitchell and Garland who can really break you down off the bounce. To have him back there at the rim is just a huge difference.
Yeah, I was really impressed by Boston's ability to kind of take away the roller for the Cavs. Like that's such an essential part of their offense. And even though the guards were able to get going, it was kind of independent of their big men, right? Like I thought Evan Mobley had a pretty rough game. He was pressing a fair bit. And Jared Allen, you just didn't really feel his presence on either end of the court, which is atypical. But when the Cavs are at their best, their team identity is playing through those bigs as much as it's the guards initiating the offense. Getting Allen and Mobley involved makes things easier for everybody. And I thought Boston did a really good job of kind of taking away the Cavs big men and limiting them as rollers. Is that something that you would expect them be able to do at that level come in the rematch on Monday? Or do you think that there's adjustments that you kind of foresee the Cavs making in that aspect of the game in particular?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that the Celtics, their game plan was sort of designed around that. And like one of the things that really stood out about like Grant Williams was a DMP CD for the first time in more than 2 seasons.
Can I just interrupt you and say that felt really rude? Like for a team that's as starved as the Cavs are for like wing shootings and just a presence on the wing to rest Grant Williams really feels like showing off for the Celtics because it's like we have this many shooters, we have this much depth, we have this many wings. Whereas Grant Williams, if he was on the Cavs, he's probably playing like 38 minutes in that game.
Yeah, and absolutely true. And he would be a huge help to them, just like he's been a huge help to the Celtics. But the reason why he wasn't in the lineup was because they wanted to play more drop coverage. And they wanted Mike Muscala in that role instead because they wanted basically to turn Donovan Mitchell and Garland into scorers and, like you said, take away the roll man. And they did a really good job of that. After the first quarter, they did a much better job on the offensive glass, which killed them in the first quarter. Like there were almost every point by the Cavs for a while was just second chance points. Um, so yeah, I'm sure the Cavs will have adjustments, but part of their challenge, I think, is going to be like just getting offense from the other guys beyond Mitchell and Garland. Like
Mm.
where is the next source of offense against great defenses like the Celtics who can play in a lot of different ways, who can switch if they want to, who can have Robert Williams blocking shots behind guys like Marcus Smart and Derek White. There's just that's like, to me, that's the Cavs' only obvious weakness is like, where does the rest of the scoring come from?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is we've been talking all season, so I think realistic goals for the Cavs. I know all the metrics say like number two in net rating for almost all the year, but we've always said like the lack of experience is going to be a factor, and also just the lack of versatility with what you're able to do when you don't have a lot of depth shooting on the wing and you don't have a lot of proven secondary playmakers like Evan Mobley's been able to do some of that this year. But doing that at a playoff level is a different animal entirely. And even in this game, like I think you saw that he was pressing. He got a little rushed. Some of the decision making wasn't as sharp as it usually is. And I would expect that sort of thing to happen in the playoffs as well. But we've been kind of talking about realistic goal being win a round and then give somebody a bit of a tough 5-6 games in the second round. And we've been kind of saying that Boston would be that team that we feel like we could bother the most. And maybe some of that is just Joel Embiid and Giannis's ability to get to the free throw line and get the Cavs bigs into foul trouble, and maybe limiting Boston to tough shots, even though they're phenomenal at making tough shots. And I thought the game last night and the season series to this point has kind of shown both why the Cavs could be a pain in the ass at times and also why the Celtics would win that series, because the shot making was just phenomenal for Boston. Jason Tatum in particular, I thought early on they hit a lot of kind of tough contested looks, and as the game went on, you just kind of start overreacting to that kind of shot making, and that leads to more and more breakdowns on the defensive end. And I gotta say, I could not be more impressed with the growth that Jason Tatum has shown this season, even from a high level last year.
Yeah, he's continuously added to his game. And I was on Cleveland radio earlier this week and they asked me about Mobley. And I kind of said, to me, his second season has been a lot like Tatum's,
Mm.
which is like he's grown, he's gotten better. He hasn't necessarily shown like the offensive leap that people really wanted him to make or thought he could make. But for Tatum, like it came as he became a better decision maker. It came as he added weight, which was, I think, one of the biggest things for him in becoming stronger. Um, and so even though he was getting better, like it didn't always show right away. And with Mobley, like he's so good. That kid, he's gonna be so good. And like you see him guarding Jalen, you see him guarding Tatum, and
Mhm.
like how many guys his size in the history of the league have been comfortable doing stuff like that. It's a very small list.
Mhm.
Um,
Especially
but
before 22. Like Tristan Thompson used to be able to do that for the Cavs, but it took him until he was like 25 years old to be able to confidently switch onto guards and perimeter players without fouling the hell out of them.
yeah, and like and Thompson was very good, but you still weren't totally comfortable with him when he was on an island against one of those guys.
Right, right. It
And
wasn't Mobley level for sure.
yeah, and Mobley, like there have been times when they play the Celtics and Tatum is his primary matchup. And it's like, and there was a play in yesterday's game where Tatum had Mobley on him, and almost any big man in the league, like if Tatum has a big man on him, the Celtics just let him cook. Like, just go
Mhm.
ahead, do your thing. Instead, Marcus Smart came over because they wanted to switch Mobley off him. And I was like, that right there is the ultimate respect for Evan Mobley. He's like the one big that Tatum does not want to go at in the entire league.
Yeah,
And that's like really, really impressive stuff. But yeah, the thing, like the Celtics, they just don't have anybody who's hesitant to let it fly.
mm.
And like they don't have the Isaac Okoro you can feel comfortable leaving. And I know Okoro's made growth. And I
It's still
love
not
him.
at volume, right?
Yeah, and like the Celtics were pretty mean about just leaving him open and helping off him, and I think especially like in transition, that's where the Celtics can be so deadly. Is like transition, semi-transition. You get it up to Hauser, to Horford, to Jalen, to whoever, and they can punish you, and you have to like really be on your toes against them at all times. Whereas I think sometimes with like even a guy like Levert, who's a better scorer than Okoro, it's like if he shoots it, like whatever, like fine, go ahead.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I don't trust the Cavs in a playoff series. Is just like they don't yet have the depth of guys that can just hurt you and put fear into you. Um, and make you a like not adjust to them, but like make you respect them.
Yeah.
And I
I
feel like
honestly,
that
I
I
think,
felt that last night.
yeah, I think honestly saying make them like the other team adjust to you, I think that's actually kind of fair because I do think when they play Philadelphia or Boston or even Denver, their identity doesn't come through as much as the team they're playing, right? Like I think Boston can get them to play their style. Philly gets you to play a bit of their game. Denver gets you to play an up and down game, right? Like the Cavs, there's times where they get away from their identity and they don't really kind of impose their will in the same way. And some of that is personnel, some of that is not really having a lot of time together. I mean, the Cavs are second behind Miami in player games missed at 234. Like that's not ideal. And this is a top heavy team, anyways, because they made a consolidation move. And I definitely felt like it was a sign of respect to see Boston elevate their game to this level because that was a really really legitimately impressive performance and
That was the
I
best they played in a while. You could feel they were ready for that one, and I do think that's a sign of how much they respect the Cavs.
I would have preferred if they did that against the Knicks in the last game, but there's another opportunity to play them before the weekend's over, so they can return that favor if they'd like. But even just like the play where Tatum got the ball in the paint and Mobley dug in on him, and Tatum just instinctively knew to swing that to Al Horford, like that is a level of familiarity that you can only get through high leverage reps together, right? Through the experience that the Celtics have. And I really do think that they are, if not the leading title threat, I would have them right there with Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee and Boston are the clear best two teams in the league. And it just kind of showed that gear that the Warriors used to show, where it was just, hey, we know exactly what everybody's responsibility is. And I gotta say, seeing Al Horford light up the Cavs in this way, it hurts. After those four playoff runs where Al Horford was not really a factor with Atlanta and Boston, this feels like a little bit of a karmic revenge at all the slander that I threw over the years.
I remember all the talk about how he just could not possibly score on Tristan Thompson,
It
and
can't even imagine it.
which is hilarious. And it hit like Horford, his evolution has been like he's become almost solely a 3-point shooter.
Yeah.
You look at his free throw attempts, like it is comical. how rarely he gets to the line. It's something like 6 times in the past 3 months, like something just outrageous, especially for a guy his size. But he's worked to become one of the best 3-point shooters in the league, and that's another thing that like the Cavs could use, right?
Mhm.
Is that big guy like the Celtics when they choose between bigs, when not when they're both on the court, but when they choose between bigs, they can go with Al Horford who can space you, Robert Williams who's going to be a lob threat. Um, and I just feel like that gives Joe Mazzulla so many options because like uh, go against Joel Embiid, right? And Al Horford defends him really well. Al Horford, because he spaces at the arc, like he really puts a lot of stress on the way the 76ers play defense. And to be able to toggle between those options has been really important for them.
Mhm.
And I do think like Mobley will probably have a lot of that over time. Like
Yeah.
when he steps into whatever he's going to become, like he is just going to rip the ceiling off for that team
Mhm.
and take them to places that right now I don't think are available to them. But man, I love that backcourt. That backcourt is so much fun. And Garland to me is like maybe the most underrated guy in the league. And I kind of see some Mike Conley in him
Mm.
where he's so intent on making the right play and not necessarily being like uber aggressive all the time that people overlook just how good and efficient he is.
Yeah, it's been a topic of conversation for us because it's funny when the Cavs had Kyrie. One of the things we wanted was for him to take more threes, and he would pass up some of those opportunities to hunt a mid-range shot.
Yeah.
With Garland, it's a little different, right? Like he's passing up some of these three-point opportunities and looking to probe and create for other guys. And I think Mike Conley is a great kind of comparison to draw. We've drawn the comparison to Nash as well, just kind of that that feel for the game and the way that he can probe throughout a defense. But I think it's been really encouraging to see how well he and Mitchell play off of each other. I thought the game against the Celtics wasn't necessarily their best game together because I did feel like Garland came on strong, and then there was an extended stretch where you didn't really feel his presence in the game, where it kind of shifted to Mitchell and it was a little more your turn, my turn. But for the season as a whole, I think that they've really worked well together. And I just think from an offensive standpoint, they're getting a lot out of the personnel that they have, like playing two bigs that aren't shooters and playing two shorter guards and not really having supplemental shooting around them. I really do feel like they're they're getting about as much as you can with the personnel that they have, and some of the limitations definitely do come through when you play a team as good as Boston or Milwaukee or any of the top teams in the league.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The short backcourt thing is over time. Like the fact that they have one of the best defenses in the league with that size backcourt is
Mhm.
crazy, and it shows a lot about Jared Allen. It shows a lot about Evan Mobley. It shows a lot about the toughness of Mitchell and Garland. Um, but like, how does that catch up to you in a playoff series when and Mitchell has super long arms and
Yeah.
he's really strong and like he's not the defender that he was in Utah last season, which is
No,
hysterical.
no.
But that's like one of the funniest subplots of the season. Is last year he just did not give a fuck about defense, and then he showed up in Cleveland and was like, "Oh yeah, this dude was known as a high quality defender coming into the league, and like
Yeah.
that's really part of the reason why he was drafted as high as he was, which was still way too low."
Yeah.
But it's kind of been hilarious. But yeah, like long term, as they are going to be competing for championships, and I do think they will be in that conversation sooner than later,
Mhm.
as Mobley continues to evolve and as that whole as they're able to add like you look at that team, add one or two guys in free agency who can help, and all of a sudden it's like okay, they've just like two shooting wings. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not like they need something that's not out there. It's just like two shooting wings, and then
You have to
everything
imagine
makes so
that
much more sense.
you'd have to imagine that they're going to be an attractive destination for a wing that's looking for a role with the mid-level exception, right? Like, it's pretty plug and play for anybody that just kind of fits that archetype.
Yeah, and and not only that, but it's a young team that's going to be competing for a while that has a lot of opportunity for a guy like that.
Mhm.
Like, why would they should be on the top of anyone's list for except it's in Cleveland. No offense.
Yeah. Hey, you never know. It's a wonderful place. I love Cleveland. Great food and the vibes are
I,
immaculate.
I actually like Cleveland. I'm a fan of Cleveland, but I had
No,
to
you have to
hit the
get in.
stereotype,
Yeah, of course. But
in
the
honor of
Cavs
Joakim Noah.
the Cavs definitely could use some shooting support, but we don't need any support for our video conferencing because we get phenomenal support from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. I do want to ask you about kind of Boston's shift to being such a kind of high variance shooting team. Like that definitely has seemed like one of the big differences between this year's team and last year's team. And I, do you think, or do you have as much of a concern kind of being a hot or cold team from three now that Robert Williams is back and they've kind of rediscovered that defensive identity? Or what have you made of that transition from the way they played last year?
I think honestly it's probably similar to what it was at the end of last season.
Mm.
They've never been a team that gets a lot of free throw attempts. They've never been a team that lives at the rim. Um, and so the way that they adjusted, and part of it is the personnel. Like I said, Al Horford has like 6 free throw attempts in the last 3 months. Yeah, and you're playing him a lot of minutes, and you're playing him at a position where typically some guys are getting free throw attempts. And but he spaces the court. He allows room for other guys to operate. And the 3-point thing, yes, that could hurt them in some games. You live by the three, die by the three, all that.
Mhm.
But I think for them, what's most important is just becoming a dominant defense again.
Right.
And if they are that, then you can get away with a highly variable offense. And like
I mean, the Cavs are a great example of that. Like they've had some really bad shooting games, and this was one of them where the final score isn't that egregious because the defense has been able to at
the
least kind of
poor
carry
people
them a
who
bit.
bought Celtics -5.
Oh God, that was funny. That was objectively
I was sitting
hilarious.
next to Sam Packard, and he's like, "Oh my God." He's
Yeah,
like, "It was -5."
we we were very aware of that as well. Not that I ever bet on Cavs games because I my emotions are already like at 11. I don't need to introduce sports gambling to that, but we were very aware of that and just man, this would be a bad beat if somebody bet Boston over.
Just a horrible beat as Donovan Mitchell goes for bucket after bucket. That's like, I don't want to call it meaningless because he brought him within a couple of possessions late in the game, but
It wasn't the same as the comebacks in the first couple games, right? Because like game one in Boston, Boston leads by 15, Cavs force overtime and win. Game two, Boston leads by 12, Cavs lead by 11, then Boston forces overtime. This was a little bit different. It made the score a little prettier than it actually was, but I think you're right about the defense being the most important thing. Like I'm not particularly worried about it. I could not get over Boston shot making though, and I looked at the tracking data, and they actually shot better the more contested the look was. They went 5 of 12 on wide open threes. They went 7 of 13 on late contests, so kind of that 4 to 6 range, and on tightly contested shots, 4 of 7. While the Cavs went 3 of 16 on wide open looks. Not great. Not great.
yeah, that's not ideal. Yeah, and especially like felt like early on the Celtics hit like just some nonsense. There were a couple possessions that were just
Yeah.
awful possessions where the Cavs played almost perfect defense, and then the Celtics bailed themselves out with like some really tough shot at the end of the shot clock.
Yeah.
And it really kept them close for a while. Like that was I thought the Cavaliers played really, really well at the start of that game, but never got any separation because the Celtics just kind of hit some shit.
And then the Cavs missed their free throws. And I just feel like it was almost like an overcorrection to Boston hitting tough shots. And then some of the defensive schemes and all that broke down as the game went on. What are some of the day-to-day differences that you've noticed, though? I was curious between Joe Mazzulla and Ime Udoka last season. Do you, whether it's strategy or just vibes day to day, what's kind of been the biggest change you've noticed?
Ime Udoka was the most like honest person with the media that I have ever seen. He would just rip the Celtics apart.
Mhm.
He would let it be known when one of the players screwed up. He would basically said that like he showed up and immediately said like we got to turn Tatum and Brown into better playmakers. Like they're not good enough as playmakers. Um, then he just like absolutely shitted on them whenever they played poorly for a while. Like called them selfish after some games. It was like really we were sitting there as media members like these guys. I don't know if they're gonna hate him or what, but as he put it, he's like I tell you guys what I tell them, and they've got to learn how to handle that. And
Mhm.
I'm going to be honest. And if they're self aware and can accept coaching, then it'll go fine. And that's kind of how it went. Missoula is totally the opposite way. Like he doesn't ever share too much in the press. He certainly doesn't say a bad word about anyone on his roster. Um, and so that's like the most obvious difference from a tactical standpoint. I think the Celtics were going to play with more player movement and like more read and react type offense regardless, but that's been the biggest difference so far this year is like when they're locked in, they are like Tatum is setting a bunch of screens and he's
Mm.
in a bunch of actions and like just being and last year there was a lot of stagnation even later in the season throughout the playoffs like there'd be times when it would just be like stagnant offense even after they figured things out and this year when they're at their best it's like wow like that's a pretty offense they're really all moving the ball is moving so that would probably be the biggest uh it like tactical just change for a while because Robert Williams was out, it seemed like Missoula favored smaller lineups a lot more than Udoka did. But Robert Williams has come back. They went out and got Muscala, and now they're back to playing really big a lot of the time, um,
Mhm.
even when they have a lot of shooting out there. And
Yeah.
that's probably one of the differences of the roster is like with Muscala, um, with Malcolm Brogdon, there are just like different options to either go smaller with more ball handlers or go bigger and still keep your skill no matter what.
Yeah. And obviously the addition of Brogdon really helps things, right? Like I think last year's Celtics team, there's just, and you saw it a little bit in the finals, there just wasn't as much ball handling on the roster, right? And Derek White's more comfortable now. And I think they even went a three guard set against the Cavs at one point with Brogdon, White, and Smart. It's just a very versatile lineup. And I definitely remember Ime calling out the team last year because
It was constant. It was crazy.
because we were on the lookout all last year for okay, what's going to be the star player that gets available for a consolidation trade, right? So we're looking at Jalen Brown like vultures here. We're just looking for any kind of hey, the Celtics are underachieving. They're about 500 halfway through the season. Like, could this be the guy? The CBA extension rules don't really favor Boston's ability to give him an extension, so it makes things a little more dicey. And then they turned it around, and I really do think that Boston's such a great example of how growth isn't linear, and how, especially when you are banking on internal growth, there's a lot of ups and downs with that process. And I think Cavs fans and us as media, we're trying to calculate kind of, right, or calibrate expectations, right? Because the goal coming into this year was, all right, let's avoid the play and let's make the playoffs. And then Brooklyn imploded and the Cavs were a little better than expected. So it's now, hey, let's go out and win around, right? Let's win around. Let's give someone a tough time and take it from there. And you look at Boston, like Tatum got drafted to a team that made a conference finals, and even then, there was steady growth, but the team success didn't necessarily always align with it. And then they finally broke through last year, and now I think this is a team that absolutely, I'd be frankly surprised if they don't win a championship at some point. But do you think there's some sort of lessons that Cavs fans could kind of take from the team building process that Boston's gone through? Eh, Seen as it does seem like the Cavs at least kind of have that core four that is likely going to be here for a while.
Yeah, I think one lesson is just how much the context of the roster matters.
Mm,
Like like Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum, they have definitely changed their habits and they've definitely become more willing passers, more capable creators. But part of the reason why things didn't work for a while was because they had Dennis Schroeder pounding the ball into the court. And like I think Schroeder has his use on a basketball court on an NBA team, but for them, a duo that like has some of the same flaws and at their worst, like lean into isolation basketball too much. Having Schroeder, another guy like that, was just so bad for their offense and for their development.
mhm.
And then you replace him with Derek White, and it's like things come to life.
Yeah.
And 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 he White they had started to transform before White arrived. Like they started to really take off as a defense, but just finding guys that really fit. And for the Celtics, it was like they used to always have a small guard, right?
Yeah.
And and they decided we don't want small guards anymore. We're going to turn Marcus Smart into a point guard and just have this enormous perimeter defense with Smart at the one, Jalen at the two, and Tatum at the three. And that was all because their two best players were Tatum and Brown. And their front office thought, how are we going to surround these guys? Like give them the best chance. And as they thought about what separated Tatum and Brown, part of it was that they're 6'7", 6'8" guys who are two-way players. How many stars are legit two-way players as a duo in the NBA? Like there just aren't many. Like
Yeah.
Kawhi and Paul George, obviously, but there just aren't too many all-star duos that double as great defenders. And so they kind of leaned into that. And so that's one thing that will be really important is surrounding Donovan Mitchell, surrounding Garland, surrounding Mobley with the types of guys that fit them. And I think that's pretty obvious, right? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Um,
Do you
but
think that's primarily just shooting, or do you think that there's a need for some perimeter playmaking as well? Because it to me, it's kind of an interesting debate because you want Evan Mobley to be that front court playmaker, right? Like you want him to be a bit of that hub that you can play through, but you kind of have to strike the balance between that supplemental playmaking to make things easier now and those developmental reps that might not go well all the time, right? Like it might go sideways, but it's important for growth.
yeah, and I do think part of it will probably be like at some point they'll just have to give Mobley the ball and live
Mm,
with what happens. But obviously a lot of that development comes out of games, outside of games.
yeah.
Like I'm sure he is growing a lot in that stuff every day at practice, every day when he's doing drills, and one day it'll show up. But yeah, I think probably another playmaker would help.
Mm,
Um, and the Celtics, like they built their roster on two-way guys who can kind of do a little bit of everything.
yeah.
Like they have all guys who are capable with the ball in their hands, all guys who can spot up and shoot, all guys who can defend multiple positions. Like there's not one guy on their roster who's like a glaring minus on either end of the court. And I think that kind of makes them unique. I don't know if
It's like almost unprecedented, right? Like because team building, you try to do the best with the talent that's available to you, but like you almost always have to make concessions of some sort, right? Like the Miami Heat are a very good team, but they need shooting so bad that buyout Kevin Love is starting at power forward, right? Like teams
yeah.
are always making concessions, and Boston's just about as complete as it gets.
Yeah, but still, like when you get to the highest level of basketball, and that's why I think adding more creation will matter around Mitchell and Garland. Like Grant Williams is really good. Grant Williams is he can shoot. He's just a knockdown shooter. When the Warriors went to a switch everything defense, he couldn't get separation, and there was no like nothing else that he had to
Mhm.
hurt them. Like, and he's worked on that, but guys that you think will be able to handle like the highest level of basketball sometimes just like run out of options at that level. And I think Grant Williams was one of those guys. I think Derek White, um, that happened to him in the finals. He was like he had a great play for them after the trade deadline. He helped transform them. He had some great games leading up to the finals. Had an awesome game one of the finals, and then it was like he just stopped.
Yeah.
And
Carter's been talking about that often, right? Like it's a thing that always happens in the playoffs. You will have members of your rotation that are really helpful throughout the course of the season that you just randomly cannot play in a certain matchup. And the Cavs do not have the depth to really absorb that, right? Like with Dean Wade, he hasn't been himself since his shoulder injury. Isaac Okoro is still figuring things out, right? Like if even Karis LeVert, like I think the thought process of keeping Karis in the game last night was to have some playmaking on the perimeter, and they did win his minutes on the court. But the problem with Karis LeVert is while he's competing more on the defensive end and he's bringing some playmaking, the scoring's just not there, and the shooting's fallen off in the last month, right? So there's not a lot of kind of multifaceted impact guys on the Cavs outside of their core four.
yeah, and so that's another thing that the Celtics have had. Like they've run into a lot of failures in their time together, like with Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Al Horford. And one of the reasons why they've been able to kind of reinvent themselves and get past some of that stuff is because they've learned from it. And I think all those guys are very coachable. And all those guys have been able to look at themselves and say, this is where I wasn't good enough. This is where I need to be better. And it's like, it's just kind of been for them, like just incremental growth all the time. While trying to fill out the roster with guys who can help. And even like Derek White. Derek White went through last year and he realized I'm not a good enough shooter at the highest level of basketball. I need to shoot at a much higher level. And he's come back, and I don't know how much to trust it like throughout a whole playoffs. We'll see if he can continue it. But so far, he's been close to 40%. He's been a much better shooter. And that's really important too, is like finding guys that will learn from all that stuff and not retreat from it and just
Mhm.
kind of take the lessons from it and go forward. And I think that's probably been the biggest thing for them. The core guys is like they've just been coachable, and they've had a bunch of different coaches. They've had Brad Stevens, Ime Udoka, Joe Mazzulla now.
I would
They've
not have
lost.
expected that. If you told me that 2 years ago that the Celtics were going to have like three coaches in such a short period of time, I would have been pretty surprised by that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then like those guys have scars. Like they went through the Kyrie Irving year when everything was just a disaster. They went through the 500 year when they were in the play-in tournament and like just kind of a mess. They were in 11th place in January of last season, and it's like you got to go through a lot sometimes as an NBA core and stick together through a whole lot. Um, and like when they were in first or second place during Kyrie's first year. Like you never would have guessed that they would be 500 a few years later.
No.
And then when they were 500, you would never guess that they'd be in the finals the next year. And it's just like, if you don't stick together through a lot of shit, then none of it's worth it. And guys will end up different places. So that would be another lesson from the Celtics time. I don't know how much of that will be like fitting for Cleveland.
Well, I think I think a lot of it is fitting. Like I think with the expectations ramping up, there's now a lot of angst. There's the vibes amongst kind of the discourse with fans has definitely been a lot different than the team itself, and I think the most important thing, and again, I'll credit Carter, who is not here but still feeding me ideas in our daily discussions.
Love it.
The thing is, like, at the end of each season, you kind of have to choose. You have to figure out what lessons you're going to take away from each year, right? Like, you have to assess, okay, what gaps between us and the highest levels of the league can we fill through internal development? What lessons are we going to learn in terms of the players we bring in, the hacks that we take, the swings that we take? And obviously, the Cavs are in an interesting position where they don't necessarily have a lot of draft equity. They'll just have their own pick, probably. I don't think they're going to be giving up swaps to Utah, as great as they were this year. But they'll have kind of decisions to make there, mid-level exception decisions, or the now seemingly popular consolidation 5 second-round picks for Jay Crowder type deal that seems to be popular. It's funny because we talked about how you only get to pull like the send every first round pick trade once. Apparently now that's the case for second round picks. So they'll have to figure out who they want to spend that on. But it'll be interesting to see what lessons they learn from this season. But
And then one more, I would say, especially with where Mobley is in his development, is the team isn't always the same from one year to the next. And like there's obviously going to be a ton of benefit from him stepping into whatever's next for him. But there will also be challenges to that, challenges for Mitchell, challenges for Garland, challenges for Mobley. Like in his role, like he's really good at that. But as he gets more, like there'll just be more lessons for him. And I think Tatum felt that a lot. Was like his first year, his rookie year, he was like stupidly efficient. Like just for a rookie, it was like, wow, he shot 41% from three. He was playing off Kyrie and Al Horford, and just like teams weren't paying all that much attention to him. And then as he had the ball more and more, it was like all his warts came out. and so it's like he was getting better and better, but the Celtics had to adjust to it and kind of allow him to flourish, allow him to get used to his new role. And I think that's something that a lot of the times is overlooked, is like when guys transition from one role to the next, it's not always seamless. And sometimes there's a lot of growth that's necessary. And it's like, it can be bumpy for a lot of different guys on the roster if they're not like totally bought into the team concept.
Yeah, I totally agree. And honestly, this is some much needed perspective and context, and a very important thing to keep in mind as we look at the Cavs this season and moving forward. It's going to be a bit of a wild ride, but as long as you're kind of seeing some of that steady growth, or if the struggles are within the context of trying to expand your game, I think that that's an encouraging sign. But Jay, you've been very, very generous with your time. Super appreciate you coming on. Make sure all our listeners are checking out the Athletic NBA show. Make sure you're subscribing there and supporting them the same way you support us. And if you need a reminder of how to support the Chase Down podcast, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.